All right, let's bring in Salam Al-Marayati, who is the president of the Muslim Public Affairs Council. And I suppose, you know, we really had this conversation after Charlie Hebdo as well, and there were incidents of Islamophobia when it came to Muslims around the world. And we're already seeing it here now, aren't we? There's been mosques set on fire.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the predictable consequence in reacting the wrong way to terrorism. And I think the point is that xenophobia plays right into the hands of ISIS. ISIS wants to see the narrative of the West fighting Islam, the West at war with Islam. And so any kind of emotional reaction then to ISIS that lends itself to discrimination, harassment, humiliation of communities is playing right into the hands of ISIS.
So what can be done to prevent more, Islamophobic behavior or events, despite us seeing Muslim leaders speaking out, condemning what happened in Paris?
Well, what I'm concerned about is that we see Muslim organizations condemning terrorism by themselves. We see other communities having vigils by themselves. The issue is, if we want to be effective in fighting ISIS, we have to demonstrate a united front. It is through unity that we can be the most effective in countering the terrorist ideology, in bringing different groups together, in standing up as one opposition to the idea of extremism. And so whether that is political extremism here in the West or the violent extremism that you see from ISIS emanating from the Middle East, I think we all have to stand up together as one body against any kind of hate.
You know, when it comes to backlash perpetrated by perhaps the uninformed on the street, that's one level. But it's a real danger, is it not, when politicians jump on the bandwagon? And we've already seen that with the National Front in France. There are such parties in Germany. And we're seeing now almost half of the governors in the United States saying we don't want any Syrian refugees.
Exactly. Unfortunately, with every one of these terrorist incidents, you have wicked opportunists that exploit the fears and hysteria of the masses. And these people have to be called out because they're not serving America's interests. They're not serving any ideals of freedom and democracy. They're just serving their selfish interests. And to use Syrian refugees now as pawns for scoring political victories, that's just outrageous. These are refugees that have fled persecution. These are refugees that our Statue of Liberty and the words in it are saying we should welcome those refugees. Now we're telling these refugees to turn back, and we're turning them back to their death chambers. That's just atrocious, and that really violates the values of our society.
Yeah, and these are refugees who are also fleeing terror. And speaking of politicians, I want to ask you about this conversation that I had just a few days ago with the French Senator Nathalie Goulet, and she was proposing on the air that radical Salafists be rounded up, those who are not in the country legally, and be thrown out of France. That was one of her solutions. Just curious to know what you think about what she said.
Well, again, people are just using terms without really understanding what they're talking about. We should go after criminals. We should be looking into people that are engaged in criminal activity, and it's the partnership between communities and law enforcement that determines the best way to deal with any kind of crime. But to go after people because of what they're thinking, to try to incarcerate people because they may not believe what we believe in terms of theology. Again, that's exactly what ISIS wants. They want to see a divisiveness in Western society between religions. They want to see a cultural war that plays into the narrative that Islam and the West are at war with each other, and it just gives them the upper hand. I think people have to call these politicians out when they try to exploit these kinds of misunderstandings about various groups. It is the behavior of terrorism that we should be after, not the ideas of people who have conservative theologies or theologies that are different from the mainstream.
It's an important conversation. Salam Al-Marayati from our Los Angeles Bureau. Appreciate your time. Thanks.